the second installment of the 3 episodes that concentrate on the spectacular visual creations from the people of Oat Studios, directed by none other than Neill Blomkamp. Just to recap, Oat Studios was created to branch out on online sources with their short sci-fi creations to get reactions and feedback from the audience. With this in mind, what better place to put it than on YouTube and Steam for free? So would you take a chance and dive into one of the worlds that Neill and his team have created? Let's take a look at one of his impressive creations, named Rakka. This is 2 takes, and this is 1 shot, an analysis of the sci-fi short made by Oat Studios, Rakka, Part 2. Be warned, spoilers ahead. The chosen title of Rakka is the English spelling for a Japanese word that can mean fallen or fall. Link that with the Icelandic word meaning male, and one can interpret the title to mean the fall of man. From the knowledge that this is a short sci-fi exploring the aftermath of an alien invasion, I would say it's a fitting title. However, it does not say the death of man, so there's hope yet. This world has 3 chapters that give it more of a dialogue on what is happening and the direction in which the film might go. The first chapter, called World, is an introductory narration of the aftermath of an alien invasion from the Klum. The narrator describes what the aliens are, how they have facilities that pump out methane to change Earth's air into better suiting their breathing atmosphere, of how they take humans and use them as incubators for their young or experiment on them, and of their superior technology, powers of mind control and telekinesis. And then it goes on to what the remaining humans are doing, banding together to make a resistance and attempting to use barriers against the aliens' hack, their mind control, with their man-made headbands. There's a brief inclusion of an angel-like shimmering being some people have proclaimed their saviour, but it brings more questions than answers. The second chapter, named Amir and Nosh, gets into the characters and their development. Nosh is a pyromaniac and tech-savvy anti-hero who wants some resistances dying and sick to create IEDs. The narrator describes how Nosh thrived in this environment with his understanding that he is free to do what he wishes, and that the resistance need him more than they let on, as he is the only one able to make the hacks for them. Amir, the opposite end of the spectrum, is an escaped mute from the aliens who have been experimented on. He bears extensive cybernetics across his head and shoulders. The narrator, named Sarah, is set to help him. It seems the introduction to these particular characters always have a meaning, as is every film that includes things to show the audience. Only time will tell what they will do. The last chapter, called Siege, is further along the timeline, showing Amir to have recovered. At the same time he is listening to Sarah asking to help their resistance, he is having a premonition about a future raid, of how the resistance will shoot down an alien pilot, of how the Klum will have hold of one of their resistance by mind control, and of how the humans must kill him to protect their own, kill the alien and chop his head off. Going back to Amir and Sarah's conversation, she exclaims that Amir now has the abilities of the Klum and has to use them for humanity, for he is their only hope. The potential ending of this movie, if it were made into a blockbuster, is left open for interpretation, and from the research that I've done, the interest lies more in the Klum themselves and the angel-like beings rather than Amir and Nosh. But before we get to that, I can at least mention that it presents the idea that Amir and Nosh are opposites from each other, apart from the obvious in a way that one speaks a lot, and the other cannot. Nosh presents the ideology that what was moral and immoral is gone out the window, and Amir is the result of that idea, what the Klum have done to him, and what the resistance chose to do by saving him. As well as Nosh and Amir presenting this changed world, they can also clash with each other on the basis of each perhaps saving the world in their own way. Nosh would be by his selfish intent, and Amir by his newfound abilities. What begs the question is whether Amir escaped or if he was actually set free. Well, what would be the purpose of setting him free? I'll have to explain many things before we get to that point, but bear with me, as it's pretty interesting. Let's start with the Klum themselves. The Klum are the alien race that have come to Earth and terraformed it, killing and experimenting on humans and using them as incubators for their young. But based on their reptilian image, they seem to be bipedal and look to have a face that humans can recognise. This was further explained in the episode about Neill's blockbuster movie District 9, and it seems the same formula is placed here. The Klum are reptilian humanoids, and in our history they can be placed in many cultures. But let's start with the technology that they use to do basically everything with. Using a quote from the interview between Neill Blomkamp and The Verge's Andrew Liptak, Neill says, "Alien creatures, the Klum, have nanotech fluid that changes shape. The aliens would have essentially come to Earth in a lake. It forms whenever they need, and when they arrive on Earth, it probably split up into several pieces, the different ships that formed out of it going to different continents and building the towers that they live in. They breathe a different atmosphere. If you look at the creature itself, it has this black hood that also runs down the bridge of its nose, and it almost looks like a gas mask, but hooked directly into their nostrils. It just does whatever they need it to. It processes Earth's air into a mixture that they can breathe. It forms weapons. It forms the structures that they live in. It forms their vehicles. I just like the idea that the fluid's always active, and it's intelligent." Their technology, the black fluid, does look like it's alive and breathing. Think of the scenes when it's doing demolition on the buildings and how it moves on Amir's head. It is alive, and it merges into anything the Klum need, no matter the size, without any limit to its power. There are 2 points I wish to address from this quote. Both lead to interesting discoveries that could theorise many things. The first being that they got to Earth by lake. Now, if we look deeper into the aspect of reptilian humanoids, their legends, and what they present, a theme begins to form. Depending on your history, the most prominent reptile mythological context might be Sobek, the ancient Egyptian deity who had the head of a crocodile. He was depicted with similar traits, such as being aggressive and animalistic, with a complex and fluid nature. He is also associated with powers, fertility, and with a military prowess. Another example is a Naga. In South Asia and Southeast Asian mythology, the Naga are semi-divine creatures which are half human and half serpent, who reside in another world called the Patala and can occasionally take human form. There are many other examples, however, considering that the Klum are created for the implied interest in making a film about the aftermath of an alien invasion, the inspiration might have come from these sources. The Klum arrive by lake, much like a crocodile. They are aggressive, inhumane, and have powers such as mind control. They have military prowess, and seem to have no problem repopulating themselves in the Earth's atmosphere. The aspect of them being semi-divine is questionable, but from what was researched, they are higher on the food chain than humans. This leads to my second point. They use the liquid like a gas mask, which means, looking at the towers that pump out methane, they are attempting to terraform the Earth to something they can get used to. But why? And also, the aspect of experimenting on humans must be for some higher purpose. And don't forget the angel-like beings from earlier. Another quote from the same interview explains, "So what I wanted to do was play with the idea that there's something immensely lacking within the Klum and what they are trying to do. The reason they are terraforming the Earth is because they just happen to be staying there for a long time. But Earth isn't the goal. The goal is to rip humans apart and understand what makes them be able to communicate with this higher species. It's almost like the higher species, to them, is God, and they've been rejected by their God, and humans haven't. There's something in the humanity that gives them the right to this higher species, and so the whole point to body horror is because they don't understand what makes us who we are, and why we have the ability to do that. Why are we different from them? So that's what leads to experimentation, and everything that happens to the character of Amir so far." Going back to Amir and the question as to whether he was set free or escaped, could imply that the Klum might have intentionally let him think he escaped because of the fact that the experiment on Amir was not finished. It's not because Amir is like a human antennae, that would be too obvious, but perhaps to observe his actions and see if he actually survives what has happened to him. Remember, the black fluid is intelligent and it came from one source. Therefore, whatever he does and feels might probably connect back to the Klum, and like a two-way radio, this might be why Amir has premonitions. From what is seen, Amir, we know, is important, and like I say every time, these are just theories. Back to the Klum, we understand they are changing the atmosphere because they are attempting to stay for a while, experimenting on humans to figure out the question of why they are inferior in the eyes of the angel-like beings, and why we are not. It seems, from what little was shown of the angel-like beings, is that they exist outside of human vision, but within the same universe. The aspect of time and space might be questionable, however, the prominent thing is that humans see them as their saviours, and from what we have found out, they have turned their back on the Klum. The word Klum, in Hebrew, actually means nothing. This, in itself, should give a good connection to what the higher species think of them. The aspect of divine and godlike status, again, shows the scary feeling of the unknown, and how we are not alone in the universe. And so, we, the humans, are stuck in the middle of a personal quest of understanding. The fear and horror that eclipse Earth is because of the curious jealousy to which humans within the short film do not have the time to question, what with everything else that is happening around them. Another quote explains the angel-like beings' motivation further. They're floating around in the edges of our solar system, and they're visualizing what's happening on Earth by proxy. They live inside some kind of quantum state, back in their ship. They're gathering any organism that they can find that can help them think about how to survive the end of the universe. They know it's coming, and they do not want to die. The Klum treat this species like a god. However, this intelligent species turned their back on them, but they didn't do that to the humans. The more Neill explains, the bigger the concept is. It's the realization that there are other beings out there in the universe, that we are not alone, but also the fact that there are far more pressing matters than what we perceive, brings the desperation of survival to the max. The Earth is dying. The Klum are taking the human population down to an almost extinct level, and yet, the high intelligent beings watching are observing our behaviour to this lesser cloned race and how we are resisting. Neill even gives examples introducing us to Enosh and Amir and how their interpretation of how we feel and act, of how the resistance is trying their best with all the limitations around them. There are divisions and small pockets of hope everywhere, making it a world where people are not living but surviving. The angel-like beings are observing everything, every organism. Therefore, that doesn't necessarily make us the saviours of their stories, or even our own. In the world of Rakka, we are in the middle of many fights, having to show ourselves, and without knowing it, our higher intelligence, if we are worth saving. If you enjoyed what was said, please follow me on Anchor and Spotify. Be kept in the loop for new episodes by following my Instagram. And if you have any questions, email me at 2takespodcast1@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for listening.